Okay. Okay, good morning. Hello, everybody. It's my great pleasure to introduce Conor McBride of Strathclyde University to you. I'm sure you know him from his work on dependently typed programming, such as, for example, his work on the epigram language and ornaments in ACTA, and kind of trying to shoehorn dependently typed programming in the ever-extending but not quite sufficient list of type extensions in GLC. Conor.
Okay, thank you. It's really delightful to be here and to hang out with old friends in their natural habitat. Yeah, thanks for coming out. Let me start with a little monadic puzzle. We know that the state monad on a given type S of states is something that's kind of goes from types to types, and we're used to having a couple of operations. Let's see if I can get this right. It's not what I'm writing, but I'm trying to get right. It's what I'm leaving out. Right. So the put operation would take something of type S, and it would give us ST of something in the unit type, right? You say what the new state ought to be, and you get a response, fine. Okay, we'd also expect to have a get operation, and there we're expecting something of just a type, ST and S. Okay, so that's to say you issue get and it gives you a computation that returns the value of the current state. But there are lots of implementations of this interface. I mean, the very same interface could be used just for communication on a bidirectional channel that transmits and receives S's. There's nothing here that says this is definitely, whatever you do to implement this interface, it has to behave like state. So, being a dependently typed programmer, I wonder what I might do about that. Okay, well, I know a thing or two, but why don't I, instead of just using types, use types indexed by the value of the current state. It's a nice thought. Then at least the types can sort of talk about the correctness of the operations with respect to the current state. Okay, so what do I need to know? I need to know what it means to be a monad on index types. So let's have a little tutorial about that. Start with a digression and then digress from it. Will I ever actually give this talk? And okay, so let's suppose we've got some n that goes from I to star to I to star, where I stands for index, any old thing. Well, what does it mean for n to be a monad? Well, the right thing we need to do before we can answer that question is to figure out what category we're in. So the objects are going to be things that live in I arrow star. So rather than just sets, there'll be sets that depend on some index. So we have to figure out what are the morphisms. So if X and Y live in I arrow star, I'm going to write x funny arrow. This thing is going to be a set of morphisms from x to y. But what is it? It's going to be the set of, so x and y are kind of like, if you think of them, pull them through the Curry-Howard lens. They're predicates on I. And then a suitable notion of morphism would be predicate inclusion. Like whenever x holds, y also holds. So we can write that down. That's for all I in I, whenever x of I holds, y of I also holds. Okay, so this thing is some kind of predicate transformer, and the morphisms we care about are predicate inclusions. And now we know what category we're working in, we can just use the same old definition of what a monad is. Okay? So there's going to be a thing which I'll call return, and that's going to take an x to an m of x with the appropriate notion of morphism. And just for kicks, I'm going to give the other operation as the Kleisli composition. So far, I see people. Is there a line below which I should not go?
Basically, return for me.
But you can imagine. So you read return?
I can read it if I.
Yeah, crane. But the point is that if you know what return usually is,
yeah,
you already know what it says.
Yeah.
So, nothing has changed except I've got a funny little dot above the arrows saying that we're using the appropriate notion of morphism for this category. Now, before you think, goodness me, isn't it terribly strange to have operations which look exactly like the operations we're used to? Then things are going to get even stranger, because what's really going on is that M is some kind of predicate transformer, and the first thing, this IRO star thing, is like a goal state, and this thing, this index, is the state we start from. So the idea is that M captures some notion of reachability. It's the type of strategies for achieving a goal starting from an initial state. So the type of return says, if our goal already holds, then we can achieve in the initial state, right? These arrows talk about what's true in a given state. If our goal already holds, then we can achieve our goal by doing nothing. And then the composition says, if we know that we can always achieve y when x holds, and we know that we can always achieve z from a state when y holds, then we can achieve a state z, a goal z from any state where x holds, by just chaining these things together. And if so, the arrows in this category, in the Kleisli category, these things that go from x to m of y, are really talking about if a precondition holds, there is a way to achieve a postcondition. And what I've written down then is nothing new or strange. It's like, welcome back to the 60s and 70s. I've just written down the rules for skip and semicolon in Hoare logic. Funnily enough, right, what's going on there is that our fundamental Kleisli arrows are operations specified by a precondition and a postcondition. But of course, when I write star, I'm not really talking about propositions. I'm talking about sets, proof-relevant things, data carrying types, where we kind of combine the data we're interested in and the logic that we want to have about them, and that is the dependently typed way. So what if we get back to state? Can we turn this thing into one of these things? And what happens if we do? Well, let's see. We now have to talk about, we have to abstract over the state we start in. I'm going to get fed up with doing everything multicolored. And now, so go in an initial state, and then whatever the operation is, we're going to end up in some final state, and then let's see if we can write down the specification, right? Someone is going to give us a particular new state, which I'll call S hat, and then what should the post condition be? What do we want to say about, what's our goal? Well, yeah, so we have to explain what, in terms of S prime, the state we end up in afterwards, what should be true?
Is prime is set.
Yes. So we're going to get, the data component we're going to get is still in the unit type, but we're going to get back a proof that S prime is S hat. Okay? So put is the easy one. Let's figure out what to do about get. Sure, we know our starting state. What's our goal? We're going to be given back an element of S. We might have opinions about which element of S we would like.
Which was previously stored, so it's prime.
Yeah. So we're going to get some S check, and we want to know some things about it. We're pretty sure, well, it's not going to behave like get unless we're really going to get back the state that it was the current state, right? So we're going to want S check to be equal to S, but we also want to make sure that get doesn't do some kind of Heisenberg bad stuff. Like we have some opinions about what S prime ought to be. We kind of like S prime also to be equal to S. Okay, so great. We managed to write down the appropriate horologic specification for put and get to make the state monad on S and a monad on sets indexed by states. There's no way you can implement this interface without really implementing the state behavior. There's just one tiny little problem.
You have to keep the state around yourself.
In order to get the state, you must already know it. Man, that's a bummer. What on earth are we going to do about that? What's the missing ingredient? Well, see, this thing, we realized this was kind of horologic translated into modern dependently typed programming. What did the horologic people do about this? Well, they had this idea that not every variable that you talk about in a horologic specification is an actual program variable. They have these notions of ghost variable that stand for things that specifications are allowed to talk about, but are definitely not around at runtime. And indeed, quite often the post condition is that some program variable is equal to some ghost variable, and if the ghost variables are accessible at runtime, it's really quite easy to discharge that proof obligation with an assignment. So we need some way of separating the things which are ghostly from the things which are actual. So let's have a think about that. Let's have some labels. I'm going to write a little asterisk for ghost and a little blob for program. Really, this is like these things live in heaven and these things live on earth. So let's figure out what we're playing at. So the key move is to decide that the state which must be respected by the operations, by the Kleisli arrows, is known only in heaven. That's to say, whatever you do, when you get this evidence, this X thing at runtime, you get this Y thing at runtime, and you have to convince the type checker that you are respecting the current state without knowing the state at runtime. So that's the game. Then correspondingly, hooray, these things have to be in heaven. And so what we're really saying is, you don't need already to know the state at runtime. We're just making sure that whatever happens at runtime agrees with whatever the type checker is modeling the current state as being. And then we get something useful. These, in the case of put, right, if you're really going to update the state at runtime, then you're going to have to give the new state at runtime. Yeah, that one's on Earth. And then, so you notice that we're forming a proposition here between a heavenly variable and an earthly variable. So somehow that has to be okay. We probably like them to be the same type if we're going to form that proposition. But hopefully, propositions, right? We probably don't want them on Earth. So we probably want to make sure that somehow it'd be fine if propositions might as well exist in heaven. Fine if information could flow from Earth to heaven. Let's just say, God's watching us. I gave this talk once. Xavier Leroy was in the audience. He said, "Conor, I worry for you. Your metaphors, they all used to be about the Marxism. Have you got religion now?"
In process.
And on the yeah, he has a point. On the get side, again, the point is that we are going to get back an actual runtime value and a promise that the get operation is telling us the truth about what should statically be going on. So this is a picture. This idea that things belonging not necessarily all in the same place, and there's some notion of restricted information flow that might matter, but that we still want to be talking about the same types of stuff. That's to say that the kind of runtime static distinction has nothing whatsoever to do with what type of stuff things are. So that's, if you were in Brisbane, I mentioned, Milner's coincidence, where, the distinction of between terms and types is lined up with the distinction between things which are that live at runtime and things which live only statically. And here we have a clear situation where it kills us, right? Because we want perfectly respectable, value-like things to live only at the type level. But similarly, if you're in the world of dependently typed programming, you'll struggle to find a dependently typed language that will give you, honestly, something which behaves like, this separation between earth and heaven. You just get told, basically you're just programming in heaven, and everything has to hang around. Certainly the AGDA notion of irrelevance certainly isn't this, because when you have irrelevant data in AGDA, you're not allowed to compute with it, even in a type. It really has to be completely irrelevant to all aspects of what's going on. Idris isn't there yet, at least with explaining what's going on. There's some kind of voodoo behind the scenes and some attempt to infer what's going on, but nothing that surfaces nicely in some theory, and that's always the way with Edwin. It's an understanding that he and I have. He'll just shop in my shop whenever the right product is ready. So that's fine. So this sort of situation is really necessary, and we're not getting it in the dependently typed languages because there's no sense of quantifiers which are properly type level only. And we're not getting it in Haskell because there's no sense of being able to quantify over values which exist at runtime but can leak up to the type level whenever you want them to. Essentially I have this sort of dual campaign to persuade Haskell to acquire proper pi types, but also to persuade the dependently typed languages to have a proper for all that you can do erasure with. Much propaganda effort to be expended. Okay, but so that's what I want to be able. I want to be able to do this in particular. But once you can start doing this, you might think, well, maybe there are other kinds of restricted information flow that might be interesting. And all sorts of reasons why you might care about information flow. I mean, you might indeed be some sort of spook who wants to ensure that the government can see everything. Nearly spoiled the joke. That's always that you've got to set these things up properly. Right, yes. What's the key property we expect if we're kind of doing gets and puts in this language where there's heaven and where there's earth? Is that we kind of hope that it's possible to generate runtime code in which none of the heavenly stuff is around. Right? That's to say, we want to get rid of everything here on up. And the idea kind of should be information doesn't flow downwards in the ordering. We should be, if we've got stuff that lives down here, we should be able to compute it even if we get rid of all the stuff that's up here. So if we do have an information flow order that that ensures that the government can see everything and then various levels of security below that, we will also have the erasure property that says we can just get on with our business even if we get rid of the government. And, yeah, so somehow, so that's the nature of static checking, is that you type check and then you erase, and then everyone behaves well, even though the high ups are long gone. Okay. So yes. So how do we build systems? So type theories which support these kinds of information flow. Anyway, I've got half an hour. So the plan is build a type theory that more or less does this, and then think about which is sort of parameterized by the information flow order we might care about, and then let's draw lots of funny little diagrams that model things we might care about. Okay, so pre-credit T's over. Let's do hard sums. Okay, so what order do I want to do these bits and pieces in? Right, let's first of all start, let's build a type theory and then refine it with some idea of information flow. And you can watch carefully for the spaces I attempt to remember to leave in the typing rules, and try and guess what's going to end up in them. Okay, so let me. Here's where Xavier is right to worry that I'm getting religion. I have a bit of serious religion at the moment, which is bidirectionality. I'll need all of these things, but I rigorously separate the things which have their types synthesized and the things for which types must be proposed in advance. Okay, so these things I call them terms, must have types proposed in advance. These things I call eliminations. We can synthesize types from them. So in particular, every elimination, the eliminations embed in the terms, right? If we can actually synthesize a type, we can surely check one. And on a whiteboard, but not on a computer, I mark the embedding with an underline. Similarly, if you want to go the other way around, if you've got a term T and you want to be able to synthesize its type, well, tough luck, you can't. So if you want to be able to get a type out, you'd better say what it is. So this is how you change direction between these two syntactic categories. The variables, which should have types explained somewhere in a context, are definitely synthesizable. And generally speaking, the elimination forms go here, which is why I call them eliminations. So in particular, function applications go here. And then all the introduction forms live at the top. So we'll have types, and we'll have dependent function types, and we'll have lambdas. And there might be more stuff later. I'll start doing functions, and if we want to add more stuff later, we can. Okay. So then there will be two judgment forms. Types go into terms, and types get synthesized from eliminations. And I'm religious about retaining the left to right presentation of information flow. So here, this thing, the type comes first, and then we're checking that this term is okay with respect to it. So it has to be written this way around. So the fact that the set theoretic epsilon is not, unlike the colon, reflectively symmetric is extremely useful. So yes, I have begun to say ni. I'm recruiting nights. Okay, so let's have some rules. I also I write contexts only when I'm extending them, and I only write the extension. Just that saves an awful lot of faff. Right, so I'm going to be bad today, and say that the type is in type. I mean, we can, if you really want to ramify the universes, we can do that later. That's not where we're focusing here. Okay, and then we can ask, how do we check that this is a valid function type? Well, we have to do it in a very particular order. We must first check that the domain is a valid type, and once we know that the domain is a valid type, we may consider a hypothetical element of that type, and not before. Under those circumstances, though, we may then check that the codomain is a valid type. Okay, so you can see information kind of flows round the rule from the sort of input stuff in the conclusion through the premises, and well, there will be output stuff on the other side. So we'll get there in a moment. Let's do lambda. How shall we check that a given lambda abstraction is accepted by a function type? Let me explain. The deal here in this judgment is that we assume the type is okay already, and that we're just checking the term. Let me in fact write a red box. Here's the red box. So this judgment, here's the red box. That judgment in the red box is the subject of the judgment. The thing that we're actually that we don't yet trust that we're checking out. In these judgment forms, everything to the left of the red box we think of as an input, which should already be okay. Everything to the right of the red box we think of as an output that we better make sure is okay. So even when you're writing the rules down, you're kind of writing a bit of a type checker. So correspondingly, information flows round the rules from the inputs of the conclusion. Then you have to show you can construct the inputs of the premises, but you get handed the outputs of the premises, and then you have to build the outputs of the conclusion. So these rules are really a programming language for writing funny little monadic programs that manufacture happiness. Okay. So those, we've got the introduction forms. Let's do the elimination forms. How do we synthesize a type?
Do you want some premises on that lambda rule?
Yes, I do. Sorry, I got carried away.
Okay.
Yes. So we're saying we trust this type to be okay already, which in particular means that both of its pieces must be okay. So it's all right to hypothesize an element of the domain, and then we can check the body of the lambda against the codomain. And you can also see why in this setup there is definitely no need for a type annotation on a lambda. We're only ever going to be type checking the lambda in a situation where the domain is proposed for us, so we're going to be able to pick it up from somewhere else. So that settles a particular running sore as far as I'm concerned. So okay, so let's move to type synthesis. How do we synthesize the type for this thing? Right, remember this thing is like currently untrusted. We've got a good candidate for what the type is going to be, right? But yeah, we've got to make sure it's okay. So yeah, we're going to check, first of all, that the type we are hoping to give back really is a type. And then we have to check that the term we propose really has that type. And then we can say, you're all right, you can have the type you're asking for. Okay. For variables, dead easy. So I write the backward turn style for look something up in the context. Right. If you can look up x of type S in the context, then no surprises that you can synthesize that very type for x. Okay. I'm missing. Well, I'll do the other change of direction in a moment. Let's synthesize the type of an application. Here, some care is required. So we've got something which looks like an application. The function is synthesizable. The argument is merely checkable. Do we have a choice? No choice about our first move whatsoever. We don't know at what type to check the S. So our only first move is to synthesize the type of the function. And it had better be a function type. Now, we said everything to the right of the red box had better be okay. So, assuming that the people who have delivered us this premise have done their job, this type is okay. Which means in particular that capital S is an acceptable type. So we can make sure that the inputs are okay for checking the argument. And now, let me just write square brackets x here to show explicitly how t may depend on x. Then we've got the question, what type do we synthesize for the whole thing? T of something. We might like to give back. So we've got a function whose return type depends on its argument value. And I mean, this x is free here, it's not free here. So we've got to do something with it. We might like to choose little s here, but we're not allowed to, because x lives in this syntactic category, and little s lives in this one. So, tough luck. Well, actually, secretly good luck. We have to substitute the argument with its type, which fortunately we know. Okay, I forgot a rule up here, which is how do you check the thing that you get when you embed a synthesizable thing? Well, this is the lucky situation. First of all, you synthesize the type for the thing that you've got. And then, well, we need some relation to hold between S and T. Here, if you're so inclined, is where you get to do subtyping. But I'm not inclined today, so I shall demand that S and T are equal on the nose. In fact, I can get away with demanding that they are equal up to alpha conversion. How am I doing? Okay. What I haven't told you yet, though, I mean, it's clear, especially when we do this, that computation can happen in types, and that's going to be important. So I'm missing a story about computation. I haven't told you how computation works, and I'm also missing a story about how computation affects type checking and synthesis. So let's fill in those blanks. So there's one rule for computation in terms, which says that if you embed a term with a type annotation, then you don't need that type annotation anymore. And then the other rule we'd expect, given that we have lambdas and application, is a beta rule. Now, careful. There's a bit of a dead giveaway in the setup. Is this a valid elimination? Syntactically. Well, an application has to have an elimination in the function position, but lambda makes a term. This is not syntactically valid. What is syntactically valid and might provoke us to do something like computation is if we actually have a lambda with its type. So note, crucial thing. This being the change of direction from terms to eliminations, the only way we can write a regex in this language is if the thing which is being acted on is labeled with its type. So it is only this construct that allows us to write non-normal forms. The normal forms you get by exactly removing that from the syntax. So what we're saying is every active computation is labeled with the type at which it is active. And here, what we're doing is when we replace an inert variable by some actual term that might kick off some computation, we're making sure that that invariant, that every computation is labeled with the type at which it's happening, is being maintained. So this is a good thing, not a bad thing. You can still do open or closed computation in the empty context without type information. But in terms of open computation, small step computation, this behaves rather well. So what do we expect to get? I should have written T of X here. We're going to get, well, what do we expect to get? We expect to get little t with S and S. Is that syntactically valid? The left-hand side is an elimination, the right-hand side is a term. But also, what's going to happen, that we do one step of application, but there might be more arguments, and this might be a function that actually, there might be another lambda under here. So we have to acknowledge that we've done one step of computation, but this thing is still active at a smaller type. Meanwhile, by instantiating the bound variable, we've kicked off potentially lots of other computations, but again at a smaller type. So you can see what we're saying is we've got one computation at a big type kind of explodes into a bunch of smaller computations at smaller types. So if it wasn't for this, a normalization proof would be really easy. Okay, so that's how computation works, and then we need two rules, which I'll write on the left here, that explain how computation affects type checking. So here we have the rule which says you want to check type capital T, but maybe it hasn't computed to the shape you need it to be yet. Like suppose T is a lambda. This rule says you really need the type that you're checking the lambda at to have computed to a pi type, to a function type. What if it hasn't done that yet? We might need to do a little bit of computation beforehand to get it into the form that we need. So we say, okay, if T computes the R and R checks T, then that's fine. And then down here, suppose we are synthesizing the type for some E, and we get back some S, but maybe S isn't as computed as we would like. For example, here, right, we might synthesize the type of a function, and what we get back might not yet be a pi type. We might need to compute it a bit more to get it into this form so that we can do the next application. Okay, that's fine. S computes to R, we can synthesize R instead. So when you go bidirectional in terms of the rules for the type system, you can also explain in which direction you need to be computing stuff. You need to compute types you do forward computation before you check types, and you do forward computation after you synthesize types, and you never do backward computation. And the traditional conversion rule turns into this thing here, where before we invoke this rule, we could have computed T to any form we like. And then we invoke this rule, and this is going to say, well, actually, we synthesized the type for E, and then we computed it to whatever we like, and then they matched on the nose. So the conversion rule has disappeared. These two rules make the system no longer syntax directed, but once you've stratified your system and done your normalization proof, then you can adopt a kind of aggressive normalize everything as soon as possible strategy, and that redeterminizes the system. Okay, so that's a tutorial 10 minutes ago in how to build a type theory in a bidirectional style. Let's put the black pen away. Think with the red pen about worlds. We're going to have some type W, and we're going to have some pre-order on worlds. And the plan is that everything in the context, we will not only know what it is, we will know where it is. And similarly, everything that we're actually trying to construct, we will know where it is that we're trying to construct it. So if we go straight to the heart of the matter, if we're trying to construct a term using some variable x in world W, but the context tells us that x comes from world V, it had better be true that V is less than or equal to W. Okay, then let's do all the easy ones. So things like change of direction, that's not going to change the world we're working in. So yes, now I should add, of course, there's a world there. I should put a world there. Box bigger. What else have I got? bunch of boring rules. Some of the things we can tell. If we're building a function in some world, then the chances are we're going to want its output in that world, so we better make sure that the body lives in that world. And if we're doing an application in some world, then it's highly likely, similarly, that the function should be in that world. Right, but now we have to think. We have to think about two things. Firstly, we have to think about where types get built. Okay. So let's be non-committal about that. Let's say that there's an operation little star that goes from W to W that tells us, if we know the world we want to build a thing in, what world does its type live in? Okay, and now we can write down some rules. This would definitely better be in some star W. This would definitely be in some star W. This and that. Oh, and we're good here as well, actually. This is where it really kicks in, right? We're building this thing in W. T, definitely, little t better live in W. Big T better live in star W. Okay, so that's one piece of thinking, thought. And the other thing we ought to think about is where, when you have a function, where its argument should come from. Right. We haven't got very many holes here, right? We've got, where are the holes? The holes are, we don't know what world this x is in, we don't know what world that x is in, we don't know what world this s is in. And somehow they're all the same problem, right? So what goes here? Release candidate 1. We just say what world we want the argument to live in. And it could be any old world, right? Interestingly, unless v is below w, the function will never get to see the argument. And it makes perfect sense to have such things. They're parametric. We know they're parametric. There's no way that this function can really make use of this argument. It's just there for type checking purposes under those circumstances. Okay, so we do that. Well, correspondingly, that immediately tells us that we stick v here. And then correspondingly, we better have v here. And because we check the actual argument in v, we better assume that the formal argument is in v. And then back here in the type formation rule, this x stands for a thing that is going to live in v. And here's the question: where does it go when we're forming the type? Does it go in star v or v? I can't remember. Yeah, I think it actually just goes in. It actually just goes in v. So there's going to have to be some careful arrangement that fixes that up. I haven't told you what rules apply to these operations, but I realize it's that time. But why is this bad? I mean, it's okay. Some such system can be made to work, but it's bad because when I give a type to a function, I have to commit to exactly which world it gets its bits and pieces from, no matter which world it's being used in. So let's say I give the type of addition as taking numbers from the real world, and then I want to add at the type level. The addition function might be able to move up to the type level because it comes from the real world, but its type says, still, I get my arguments from the real world, can't add type level numbers. Rotten luck, vector append out the window. And so that won't do. And there's another thing that's kind of bad. You know the multi-hole problem? Right. And it sounds kind of pretty weird when you explain it with 3 doors. But if you explain it with 1,000 doors, right? Yeah. So Monty says, pick a door, and you're wrong with high probability. And then he opens 998 doors revealing goats and says, do you want to swap? I mean, you're wrong. Right. So imagine we're in this sort of situation where, let's say we've got the world of library things and the world of type level things, and then instead of having just one world in between, let's suppose we've got lots of them, all able to access library stuff, all revealing themselves to the type checker, but not with their stuff in scope of each other. Possibly able to communicate with each other by side effects, but not just by variables being in scope. Does it really make sense to say, well, the type system allows us to, forces us to talk explicitly about, we can have a function which only works in this world. If I want to do a computation in this world next door, I need to use a completely different function with a type that says we're allowed to use things from here instead of things from there. So somehow that's the idea that we just use absolute worlds in the description of functions is pretty dangerous. So we're going to need some sort of relative notion of world. So we just give ourselves some notion of quantifier Q, and then what goes here is whatever Q does to W. So these quantifiers are going to be things that explain where to get arguments from relative to the world where you want the answer. So this is Q with some monotonic action on W. So there will be some other conditions which I don't have time to work through, but I've scribbled them all down on a piece of paper and proved a theorem. What's missing? Here. Q here, QW there. Yes, so if you set this up correctly with Q interacting with the pre-order appropriately, Q certainly has to be monotonic. There's actually another condition as well, which amounts to a kind of functoriality. Then you can prove what is clearly the vital admissible rule. Right? These are not rules of the typing system. Admissibly, this is just for the system to work. This has to be true, right? If at some world that little t checks at big T, and you can get from that world to some other world, then little t better be okay there. Otherwise we're in trouble. What we're really saying is, how do you make, when you have this rule, how do you get stability by substitution? You've really got to respect this. Yeah, so that's the thing that you have to have. So it then becomes a matter of trying to prove this in order to discover the conditions that must hold on Q and W, and they turn out to be fairly sensible conditions. Okay, let me stop there, and I'm willing to discuss for as long as you want to hang around or not. But that's kind of where I've got to.
Thank you.
Questions?
So generally, you sort of want the letters for your worlds, so
Sorry?
do you want the letters or something?
Yes, well, don't let things be a lattice. I mean, so far,
Some kind of
so far the pre-order condition has been strong enough. We'll see whether more structure is necessary. It's clear, by the way, we should kind of get back to where we came in. With this thing, then we can, just to finish the picture, we said we wanted worlds, Earth and heaven, and we said we wanted quantifiers pi and for all. And now we can fill the operation in. If we're working on Earth and we're really doing relevant quantification argument on Earth. If we're working on heaven, in heaven, who cares? And if we're quantifying irrelevantly, statically, then everything in heaven. And correspondingly, if we define plus with pi types for its inputs, and then use it in heaven, the numbers will come from heaven. So this is an instance of this picture. I mean, this is the simplest picture that you could possibly have that makes the system worthwhile. Actually, not quite, I lied. There's a simpler picture. There's the picture which looks like this. And this is the familiar picture that we have when programming in Haskell. We've got two worlds, heaven and earth, but information flows in neither direction. So you have to use sort of singleton types acting as psychic media. I am a thing at runtime, but I am in contact with the spirit world. And my spirit partner has the same value as me. So where did the green pen end up? Did I? I've disappeared, the green pen.
It's in the spirit world,
Yes.
obviously.
So the idea you can that you can erase the code from any upward closed set of worlds. So we're just used to performing this erasure. Actually, you can perform this erasure if you like, and take a Haskell program, rub out all the programs, you get perfectly sensible types. I think that's So what you have for this picture, if you start erasing things, is that it doesn't have to be green, really, does it? That you can choose to erase this upwardly closed set, and you get just the code that computes here and the library code. And you can do that for any of these worlds. So you can write a program which coordinates across a bunch of computational worlds. Oh, I found the green pen. And too late. And then do the erasure to generate the actual executable for each one, like taking an orchestral score and writing out the part for each player. So there's lots of possibilities, just drawing different sorts of diagrams like this that allow us to model all sorts of different situations. So I'm hoping that what I'm really gunning for here is general reusable theory of information flow in type systems, with the meta theory done once and a load of applications just by configuring the world topology differently. I mean, essentially, the semantics of type theory is always done with Kripke models, because you have to model the idea that open execution happens in a context which is contains at least the stuff that where the term was defined. You might have substituted something under some binders, and now the context in which you're using it is bigger than the context it came from. So that obliges you to have a Kripke semantics that talks about future worlds in which things might get used. So the message there is, if you're going to have a Kripke semantics, you might as well have an interesting Kripke semantics.
So when you were talking about all the different types of erasure you could possibly have, that reminded me of the type theory and color paper, where they added colors to all the type theories and erased it, whatever they like.
Yeah.
So it feels like this sort of thing might be that might be an instance of this sort of thing.
It's not clear which way around it goes. I mean,
Yeah.
we of course know that any old pre-order can be turned into a set inclusion order, which is, and so their colors are being manipulated in terms of set inclusion.
Yeah.
So I don't think they have quite the same story here about the quantifiers being actions on worlds rather than worlds themselves.
Right.
This kind of localization, which I think is necessary. But otherwise, they're very much cut from the same cloth. And I also expect that not only should you get an erasure for any upwardly closed set of worlds, you should also get a parametricity theorem. Yeah.
This seems to have a lot of parallels to n-truncated objects in homotopy type theory, where like Q would be a morphism in a higher. What's the exact relationship there?
I don't know, but I intend to find out. There's lots of stuff where the sort of ideas of nothing to see above such and such a level. So it could be that we can get a stronger handle on where the bits actually are in homotopy type theory by working in an information flow system. But I don't know. It's a whole other story that I'm beginning to work on. The Strathclyde version of homotopy type theory. Yes, so that was one of the reasons why I hope it wasn't too much of a kind of digression, but you can tell perhaps from the all of the kind of the thinking about how typing rules fit together that I've taken up the meta theory of meta theory as my new hobby, because there's just been this explosion of type theories that have got the same kind of basic underlying stuff but are marked up in funny little ways to capture some extra aspect of what's going on. I could have filled this whiteboard in this. I could rub out all the color, leave all the black and white stuff, and give a completely different talk about linear dependent type theory. And correspondingly, I want to prove type preservation once, goddammit! And that's I'm certainly working in that direction. And then, what is the push out of all of these funny little ways to sort of model slightly more information? Can we get anything useful from it? Funny thing is, here what was important in the world structure was the pre-order structure. And in the linear type theory, what's important is a monoid structure. monoids here, pre-orders there. Have we ever heard of anything that generalizes monoids and pre-orders? You know, what if we just say category and get on with it? Well, one thing that happens is that there's more than one choice of morphism, so you need an annotation whenever you look at the variable. Apart from that, that's just an intriguing possibility. Definitely still more questions than answers.
Any more questions? Otherwise, let's. So Conor will be around today until 4 o'clock. Anybody is interested in talking to him, definitely feel if you're interested. And generally, I mean, you're in Sydney actually for 2 weeks, so if you want some extended chat, then just kind of come up and get something. Okay.
My life is full of the marking that I couldn't leave behind, but any excuse to displace from it is
Couldn't you talk about
Thank you very much for coming.
Could talk about basic superstructure, Marxism instead of
yes, potentially.
Basic superstructure and relationships and. Hey Conor, do you remember?
yeah, I think
Right.